linen stands in a doorway cut from stone. Dawn has not reached the river yet. The lamps still hold the room. He has done this same sequence so many times that his hands move before thought catches up. Oil, water, incense. Words spoken in a rhythm learned from a teacher whose teacher learned it from another teacher, going back through fathers, uncles, aunts, elders, scribes, initiates, all the way into a past nobody in that room can measure. Outside, boots hit stone. A different rhythm. Orders. Men who do not know the sequence inside the room and do not care to know it. Their task sits in the hand like a piece of paper. Their task says the ritual stops today. The room still glows. The river still moves. The stars keep their places. Yet something much larger than one room is ending. Can you feel the strange quiet in that moment? The kind that comes when a world ends in administrative language rather than thunder. No trumpet. No cosmic crack in the sky. A few soldiers. A few signatures already made elsewhere. And a transmission running for centuries cut in a morning. Exactly 1,431 years ago, in approximately 595 of the Common Era, the last public network of a much older consciousness craft across the eastern Mediterranean had entered its final collapse. The year matters, the larger window matters more. Between 529 and roughly 595, an entire paradigm of human possibility was pushed out of public life. Temples closed, schools ended, books burned or hidden, rites criminalized. The living chain of practice, teacher to student, mouth to ear, was driven under the floorboards of history. What was being pushed down was larger than one text, larger than one ritual, larger than one religion. It was a way of working with human awareness as if awareness were the root fact and body. Thought, emotion, dream, speech, and death were layers inside it that could be trained, navigated, and passed through with skill. A person could move upward through their own conditioning. A person could shed fixed identity in stages. A person could meet the source directly. That was the claim. That was the training. That was the threat. The inner map still works. The institutions fell. The ground they were pointing to stayed where it always was, inside human experience itself. The story gives the practice its spine. That man in linen stood in the temple of Isis at Philae, an island sanctuary near the southern border of Egypt. By the 6th century, Philae carried the last publicly functioning temple rites of the old Egyptian stream. 2,000 years of continuous service sat in those walls. Daily offerings, festival cycles, initiations. The priesthood there held more than ceremony. They held a method for aligning heart, image, breath, sound, and inner sight until the worshipper and the power invoked entered the same field. A governor under the Byzantine Emperor shut the temple between 535 and 537. Priests were arrested. Sacred images were carried off to Constantinople as trophies. A long river of oral transmission hit a wall. Sit with that for a moment. A living practice can vanish in one generation. Stone stays standing. The gestures survive in pictures. The words survive in fragments. The living spark between guide and student, the timing of it, the pressure of it, the exact moment, the elder says hold there, release there, stay with that. That part goes first. If a public world ending through paperwork and soldiers is hitting you harder than you expected, drop that in the comments. The door at Philae was one closing. Another stood in Athens. By 529, the Academy of Athens had already lived many lives. Plato founded it in the 4th century before the Common Era. By the time Justinian shut it, it carried far more than public argument and polished logic. Late antique philosophy had become practice. Breath, ritual, contemplation, image, invocation, silence, disciplined attention, all of it braided together. One stream inside that late academy came through a Syrian thinker named Iamblichus, born in the 3rd century of the Common Era. He pushed against the older idea that contemplation alone could lift the human being into union. Plotinus, a century earlier, leaned harder on interior ascent through concentrated thought and inward turning. Iamblichus said thought by itself left too much of the human being untouched. Body had to enter. Material symbols had to enter. Sound had to enter. The whole person had to be seized. He called this theurgy, divine work. Work is the right word. Not belief, not affiliation. Work. In his book on the mysteries, he describes a practitioner who undergoes purification through diet, restraint, silence, and ordered living. A space is prepared with materials linked to certain powers, metals, stones, herbs, images, colors, timings. Sacred words are spoken in the old sound forms themselves. He insists their force sits in vibration, not in dictionary meaning. Attention is fixed on a divine image until the image turns from symbol into presence. Ordinary identity loosens. The practitioner rises into what the Greeks called henosis, direct union, the meeting where worshipper and divine source stop standing apart. Plain English version. A trained environment was built so the human being could move beyond the social personality and enter a state where awareness knew itself as larger than thought, role, memory, and flesh. That sentence matters because later empires filed such work under the word magic and treated that label as enough reason for punishment. Empire loves categories. Put a living method in the wrong box and a sword feels righteous holding it. The Academy held that the Wogic current alongside a Hermetic current, and the Hermetic current takes us back to Egypt again. Tehuti in the Kemetic stream, Hermes in the Greek stream, fused over centuries into Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. That fusion did not grow from lazy name swapping. It grew from a real encounter between two civilizational minds in Hellenistic Egypt, especially around Alexandria, where Greek seekers met Egyptian priests who had already spent many centuries treating mind, speech, image, breath, death, and cosmic order as one science. Kemetic tradition used the word netter for the powers we flatten into the word God. Netter points closer to a principle of consciousness, a living force that takes person-like shape so the human mind can relate to it, work with it, invoke it, align with it. Tehuti carried the current of wisdom, writing, measure, the ordering of mind, the hidden architecture under speech. When Greek culture met that current, Hermes became the vessel for it in Greek thought, and the Hermetic writings began to speak in a mixed language, Greek surface, Egyptian spine. The clearest surviving statement of that spine appears in the text called Poimanders, the first tractate of the Corpus Hermeticum. The scene opens with a practitioner entering a changed state and meeting a vast intelligence called Poimanders, the shepherd of human beings. Through that encounter, the practitioner receives both a cosmogony and a map of ascent. Creation unfolds, the human falls into identification with form, and the way back rises through 7 layers. The text speaks of 7 governors, 7 powers linked with the visible planets, and at death or through practice, the soul can pass upward through them, laying down one burden at each level. Moon, the mask and the pull of unstable image. Mercury, the calculating mind. Venus, craving that clings. Sun, pride of separate identity. Mars, aggressive push. Jupiter, grasping expansion. Saturn, hard falsehood and heaviness. Beyond them waits the Ogdoad, the 8th sphere, a word that means the realm above the 7, the band of pure praise where conditioned personality loosens and bare presence shines through. Please don't let this fly over your head. This 7-sphere material sounds mythic until you translate it back into the human interior. Then it turns plain. A human being carries layered habits of distortion. Each habit feels like self while it is running. A practice can peel those habits one by one. The upper movement through the spheres is the old way of describing that peeling. The map is ancient. The mechanism is close enough to touch. A later Hermetic text, the Asclepius, carries one of the saddest passages in late antiquity. It speaks as if from inside a foreknowledge of loss. A time will come, it says, when Egypt, once the home of the gods, will stand forsaken and the holy work will appear fruitless. The gods will return to heaven. the land will be emptied of their presence. That passage lands harder when you hold it beside Philae, a text already mourning an end that later arrives in stone and chain, a tradition seeing the shadow before the blade. A little later, the buried texts at Nag Hammadi turn this from prophecy into first-person report. Hang with this. The human voice inside that jar becomes one of the clearest windows into what was being protected from erasure. Before we reach the jar in the ground, another figure has to stand in the room, Hypatia of Alexandria. She taught mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy in the early 5th century. People tend to freeze her into a simple, brilliant woman murdered by zealots and stop there. The living detail matters more. She stood at the junction where Greek philosophy, Egyptian wisdom, and direct contemplative discipline still met in a human teacher. Her student Synesius carried part of that junction forward in a small book on dreams. Synesius speaks of a subtle vehicle, a pneumatic body made of finer substance than flesh, active in dream and after death. He treats imagination as the meeting place of the senses, the faculty through which the human being receives finer impressions and learns to move in other bands of experience. Anyone who has worked with lucid dreams, threshold states, or the moment between waking and sleep knows the territory he is pointing toward. The physical frame rests, another layer of experience lights up, and the one inside that layer can be trained. That line matters for this title because the same state power that attacked temple rites also attacked the training of that inner vehicle. A person who can remain clear in altered states becomes difficult to govern through fear. A person who has rehearsed dying while alive carries less terror when authority waves the afterlife like a weapon. Hypatia was murdered in 415 by a Christian mob in Alexandria. Stripped, dragged into a church, cut apart with shards. One human body paying the price for a culture already narrowing. That murder stands earlier than the 6th century crackdown, yet it carries the same wind in it. Picture the sequence. A library complex smashed in the late 4th century. Hypatia killed in the early 5th. The Academy closed in the early 6th. Philae sealed in the same century. A council condemning pre-existent soul teaching a little later. One culture learning to treat interior freedom as danger. The buried jar comes in next. In the middle of the 20th century, a sealed jar turned up near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. Inside sat codices that had waited in the ground for around 16 centuries. Someone in late antiquity hid them on purpose. That matters. Among those texts stands the discourse on the 8th and 9th, a Hermetic initiation dialogue. Teacher and student enter prayer, ascent, and vision together. Then the student says something so direct it cuts through all the labels and scholarship around it. I see myself. I see the 8th. I am among the powers singing. There you are, a practitioner report, a person inside the method telling you what the method opened. That line sat under the ground while states rose and fell overhead. Plain English again, the practitioner moved through conditioned layers and reached a level where identity grew light enough that a larger field of being became immediate, as direct perception. The application is coming. First, the larger collapse has to show its full shape because the shape explains why a buried codex still matters. The official act people cite first is Justinian's closure of the Academy in 529. Fair enough, that is a clean date. History loves clean dates. Real erasure moves in clusters, not clean dates. The emperor's legal project, gathered in the code and later the larger body of civil law, treated divination, pagan rites, and non-approved forms of ritual activity as punishable acts. In street terms, the state gave itself permission to seize property, exile practitioners, and in some cases kill them for carrying forward non-Christian interior work. Once a living discipline gets grouped under the word sorcery, the machinery starts rolling. At the same time, church councils were working on doctrine in ways that cut the floor out from under ancient ascent models. One teaching held by Origen of Alexandria, an early Christian thinker with strong roots in the Alexandrian atmosphere, concerned the soul's pre-existence. Consciousness, in that view, does not start at birth and does not vanish at death. It carries a longer arc, a longer education. A teaching left open a bridge between Christian language and older Kemetic Hermetic views of the soul's descent and return. In 553, the Fifth Ecumenical Council condemned that teaching. The wording is harsh. Pre-existent souls and their restoration were named fabulous and monstrous. Listen to the charge hidden inside those words. Monstrous restoration. The restoration judged monstrous was the human being recovering direct continuity with a life beyond one birth and one institution. Pull that bridge away, and the old ascent sciences lose legal and theological room to breathe. At Philae, soldiers and arrests closed the last temple stream in public view. In Athens, state edict closed the late philosophical school carrying theurgic work. In doctrine, soul pre-existence was denounced. In law, older rites were grouped with punishable magic. The convergence of those actions across that 70-year band is the reason the title uses the word band in a large sense. A civilization-wide yes became a civilization-wide hush. You feel the weight of that? A society can decide that a human being rises only so high. It can decide that direct access to the source is disorder. It can decide that disciplined inner ascent counts as crime when performed outside approved language. The old Egyptian stream had never separated religion, healing, ethics, image, and cosmic order in the way later frameworks did. In the Pur-Ankh, the house of life, training included language, medicine, ritual, astronomy, and the care of the soul together. A person learned to examine the heart, align speech, hold image steadily, and meet the dead with skill. The Hermetic stream carried that integrated spirit forward into Greek idiom. The late Academy absorbed it. The 6th century pressed down on the whole cluster. That helps explain why what resurfaced later came back in pieces rather than as one clean lineage. A strand in Arabic planetary rites, a strand in Christian stillness practice, a strand in Renaissance Hermetica, a strand in texts hidden underground. Before the survivors enter, one more thread from the Academy matters: the 7 philosophers who fled east after the closure. Demasius, the last scholarch, went with Simplicius Priscian of Lydia and several others to the court of the Persian king Khosrow. Their move was more than academic relocation. Men were carrying libraries in their bundles, commentaries, ritual notes, interpretive keys, perhaps things too dangerous to name plainly once back under Byzantine eyes. Picture them on the road, scrolls wrapped in cloth, dust, a hard ride east. The sense that a civilizational house has caught fire and the first task is getting the seed out before the roof drops. Agathias, writing close to that period, says the philosophers were given protection and a stipend at the Persian court. That one detail matters more than it looks. Protected scholars become preserved memory. Unprotected scholars become ash. The rupture is in place now. Public temple chain closing in Egypt. Philosophical theurgic school closing in Greece. Doctrine shutting a soul bridge. Law reaching for bodies and books. Toward the middle, that feels historical. Toward the root, it turns personal. The same pattern repeats whenever a living person begins rising above the conditioning that keeps them governable. Inner police appear long before outer police do. A little later, that line becomes practical in a sharp way. The empires outside you had mirrors inside you all along. If the scope is opening for you by this point, if the closure of Athens and Philae and the council's attack on the soul bridge are starting to connect into one shape, drop that in the comments. So what survived? The answer comes in human roots. One route ran east through Persia and later through Arabic-speaking intellectual culture. Baghdad, Cairo, Harran, Cordoba, these cities became holding chambers for material the Christian empire had squeezed out of public life. Greek philosophical works were translated. Hermetic materials moved in mixed forms. Astral rites, image magic, planetary invocations, and contemplative manuals entered new languages and new settings. A medieval Arabic book later called The Goal of the Wise preserves an astonishing amount of older practice logic. Timing by stars, preparation through fasting and restraint, specific images linked with powers, with speech formulas whose force lies in cadence and sound. The outer robe changed. The body of technique still breathed underneath. A second route ran through a strange and brilliant community at Harran, the Sabaeans. These people understood survival politically, as well as spiritually. Islamic rule recognized protected communities with scripture and prophet. The Harranians identified themselves as people of the book and named Hermes, known in Islamic memory as Idris, among their prophetic figures. That move gave them legal room to continue practices with deep roots in the older Hermetic theurgic world. Ibn al-Nadim, an encyclopedic bookseller and scholar living in the 10th century, gives a rare window into their world. 7 temple rooms linked with 7 planets. Invocations and offerings measured to celestial timing. Think about what that means. Several centuries after Christian suppression had closed the same type of work in its own territories, a community in Harran was still doing a version of it in the open through legal finesse and cultural intelligence. The old current hid in plain sight by changing clothes. A third route ran through Egyptian Christianity itself, especially the desert traditions. This one needs care because casual comparison muddies more than it clarifies. The Desert Fathers were Christians. Their prayers were Christian. Their aim was framed in Christian language, yet the inner mechanics of their stillness work show structural kinship with older Egyptian disciplines. Take hesychia, stillness, and later hesychasm, the prayer of the heart held with breath and repeated inwardly until mental noise thins and a deeper band of awareness becomes stable. Outer words differ from temple liturgy. Inner movement rhymes with it. Gather the scattered mind. Settle the breath. Anchor attention in the heart. Let surface identity soften. Cultural memory behaves like underground water. Forms disappear from the surface and still feed wells miles away. A fourth route ran west into Italy after Constantinople fell in the 15th century. Byzantine scholars fled carrying manuscripts. Among those manuscripts sat the Hermetica. Cosimo de' Medici received them and told Marsilio Ficino to set Plato aside long enough to translate Hermes first. That decision tells you how potent these writings seemed to the Renaissance mind. Hermes looked like an elder source, older than Greek philosophy, closer to Egypt, closer to primordial wisdom, closer to a sacred science of mind, and cosmos joined. From there, the material-seeded Renaissance currents, memory arts, image practice, astrological magic, contemplative ascent, and later the bold cosmology of Giordano Bruno, who paid for his range with fire. The suppression kept reaching across centuries. A text can resurface. A civilization may still fear the person who understands it from the inside. This whole survival story rewards a second look at the word banned. Banning did not erase the science of ascent. Banning shattered public continuity and scattered the pieces into coded roots, safer languages, side communities, and buried jars. The public staircase got demolished. Individual steps stayed standing in different places. Can you picture that? A culture where nobody can walk the whole staircase in one institution anymore, yet fragments of the steps still sit in deserts, libraries, monasteries, temple rooms, and song. That is why reconstructing the inner logic matters. The ritual worlds change too much to rebuild them whole. The inner grammar remains readable. This is the moment where a lot of historical work gets stiff and dusty. You know how we get down. Story has to cash out in lived use or it stays museum air. Toward the end of this stretch, the buried codex becomes a mirror for your own structure. The old systems agreed on something plain. Human identity is layered. The layer speaking your name, guarding your image, chasing approval, fearing loss, grabbing status, pushing against death, all of that is real as process and thin as essence. Under those processes sits a brighter fact. That brighter fact can be covered, shaped, narrowed, trained into trance, terrified, distracted, worshipful, proud, wounded, numb. It can also wake up inside all of that and know itself again. The Kemetic stream framed this through heart, name, vital force, soul bird, luminous spirit. the many parts of the person ordered around Ma'at, the balancing principle of truth and rightness. The Hermetic stream framed it through descent, through 7 governors, and ascent back through them. The late Academy framed it through theurgic elevation and divine union. Desert stillness framed it through heart prayer and unceasing recollection of God. Same mountain from several faces. A person can hear that and treat it as comparative religion. A person can also hear it and realize the map fits immediate life. What outer empire did in the 6th century, inner empire does every day inside the ordinary mind. A decree goes out. Certain states get approved. Certain questions get banned. Certain forms of inward freedom are treated as disorder. The local ruler in the head and chest says, hold the mask, keep the script, fear the silence, stay identified, do not rise. That is why these older schools put such weight on deliberate shedding. A human being carries governors inwardly. The outer 7 in the Hermetic text become lived psychological rulers inside a single nervous system. Stay with this. The practical turn sits right behind it. Picture the buried student again, the one who says, I see myself, I see the 8th. That student did not leap there from ordinary confusion in one dramatic hop. A sequence opened. The older schools gave different names to the sequence, yet the underlying movement holds steady. Release the mask. Soften the grasp. Gather the scattered mind. Steady the image-making faculty. Pass upward through conditioned bands. Stand in the wider field. That is the inner craft that got pushed underground. The public ban matters because public structures make training easier. The interior movement still stands open because the human build did not change when the laws changed. Toward the final stretch, that sequence becomes something you can test tonight. First, one more piece. The reason power moved so hard against it. People sometimes imagine suppression grows from simple ignorance. Sometimes it does. A lot of the time, power sees clearly enough. It sees that a method capable of loosening fear, reducing attachment to role, and giving direct access to a deeper source of authority changes the kind of human being available to govern. Authority based on terror works best on a person whose interior stair has collapsed. A temple system teaching the art of dying before death, rising through inner bands, and meeting the divine through disciplined practice produces people with a different center of gravity. Such people may still obey law, farm land, raise children, trade goods, and serve in public office, yet the deepest lever of control weakens. Threaten the body, and something in them remains unpanicked. Threaten social standing, and the mask no longer owns them in the old way. Threaten eternal punishment, and they have already crossed interior thresholds that taught them the afterlife is not a rumor invented by institutions. Sit with that. A civilization that monopolizes the divine has strategic reasons to fear anyone skilled in direct access. That sentence belongs right beside the soldiers at Philae, right beside the edict at Athens, right beside the council pronouncing soul pre-existence monstrous. The state did not fear incense. It feared what disciplined incense, breath, image, ethics, and inward ascent did to a human being over years of use. The practical side comes forward now. If you've stayed through the temple door, the academy, Hypatia, the desert monks, Heron, and Florence, say something in the comments. The old schools wrapped the inner ascent in many outer forms: temples, planetary rooms, icons, divine names, vigils, dietary rules, washings, stars, desert silence. Those wrappings carried power because they shaped the whole human instrument. Strip the wrappings away, and an inner sequence still remains usable. Think of the 7 governors as 7 inward rulers. Each one claims the throne for a stretch of the day. Each one says, I am you. Each one carries a habit of contraction. The practice of ascent is the art of seeing which ruler has the throne, loosening its grip, and rising into the wider chamber above it. The first ruler works through image and performance. The old text ties it with the moon, changing face, reflected light, borrowed glow. In lived terms, this is the layer that manages how you appear. Smile when grief sits in the chest. Posture when you feel small. Borrowed language when you have not yet felt the thing from the inside. The first move of practice is disarmingly plain. Sit quietly and allow your inward state to match itself. Let the face inside the mind and the face being shown come into alignment. If sorrow is there, sorrow sits there. If anger is there, anger sits there. If dullness is there, dullness sits there. You stop spending force on image management. Energy gathers. This is why temple ethics mattered. A divided life burns force all day long. A straightened life frees force for ascent. The second ruler works through calculation and clever control. In the Hermetic frame, this carries mercurial flavor, quick mind, strategy, arrangement, useful in commerce, exhausting in the soul. A person trapped there treats every encounter as a board to game. Even prayer becomes negotiation. The move here is release of manipulation. Sit with the breath and feel how much of your life energy keeps leaning ahead trying to engineer outcomes. Feel it in the jaw, the forehead, the belly, the shoulders. On each exhale, let the need to arrange tomorrow loosen one turn. When that ruler softens, attention gains honesty. You stop bargaining with reality and begin meeting it. The third ruler works through craving, the Venusian layer in the old model. This is the pull that turns every object, person, status, sensation, or spiritual glimpse into medicine for a wound it cannot heal. Desire by itself is not the trouble. Life moves through desire. The contraction sits in the fantasy that one more acquisition will settle the ache of being cut off from your own source. In practice, bring one current craving to mind. Feel it in the body, rather than telling stories about it. Where is the pull located? Chest? Throat? Lower belly? Stay with the felt pull until the object fades and the raw hunger shows its own face. That raw hunger often hides grief, fear, loneliness, or simple untrained intensity. Meet that layer directly, and craving loses some glamour. The fourth ruler is pride of the separate self, the solar band in the Hermetic map. This one is subtle because society rewards it. It thrives on specialness, centrality, self-importance, private superiority, private shame, the whole orbit of me as the main star in every sky. Shame and pride belong to the same throne. The old rites used overwhelming image, scale, and timing to crack this ruler open. Vast halls, cosmic symbolism, stars overhead, divine forms larger than personality. All of it reminded the practitioner that the private self sits inside a much larger order. You can reproduce the inner essence of that move right here. Feel your breathing body. Feel the room around it. Feel the fact that sensation, sound, and thought all arrive inside one field of knowing. Ask quietly, what in this moment is truly central? Do not answer fast. Let the question widen the chamber. Let the small throne shake a little. The fifth ruler works through force, aggression, the Martian layer, the push that comes from defending a fragile center. It appears as pressure, hurry, constant inner bracing, argument rehearsed in advance, tension held as if life were one long siege. In the old temple and theurgic settings, this ruler was approached through purification, order, and timing, because raw force inside a person can either rise as clarity or spill as harm. Feel your own pressure pattern right now, the place in you still preparing for attack. Breathe there until the heat turns from weapon into information. Aggression often guards fear or injury. When the guard steps aside, clean strength stays behind. The sixth ruler works through appetite for expansion, Jupiter in the old language, more land, more status, more certainty, more spiritual credit, more followers, more proof that you matter. A person can turn even wisdom into accumulation, one more shining object on the shelf called self. Practice here means finding the part of the day where more is driving you and asking what safety it imagines more will give. Sit inside the sensation of enough for a few breaths. Feel the rebellion if it comes. Stay there. Enough is a sacred solvent. It melts a lot of empire out of the chest. The seventh ruler is the heavy ring, Saturn in the Hermetic scheme, falsehood hardened into identity, time, fate, and the stubborn trance of being only the surface person. This is the deepest governor because it feels old, earned, solid, unquestionable. My history, my wounds, my role, my limits, my name as prison instead of tool. The old ascent schools approach this layer with endurance, repetition, ritual solemnity, and at the high stages, direct contemplation of death. When the deepest falsehood says, I am this bounded thing and nothing more, mortality becomes its loudest evidence. The older practitioners trained with death in view, so the evidence lost some of its power to hypnotize them. You can meet the edge of that ruler in a quieter way tonight. Sit after exhale and rest in the small pause before the next inhale rises on its own. In that pause, do not build a story. Do not rush toward the next breath mentally. Let the pause open like a doorway. A little taste appears there. Identity has not vanished. Yet the grip loosens. The wider chamber above the rulers flashes its light through the crack. That wider chamber is the old Ogdode, the eighth sphere. The field above the seven rulers, the level where praise arises because the burden of private identity has grown lighter and the person tastes a life larger than self-concern. The student in the buried dialogue says, I see myself there because the self seen there is larger than the social self that started the practice. This is no museum piece. You can test the first movement tonight. Match the inner face with the outer face. Feel which ruler has the throne. Breathe until its body signature grows plain. Hold the pause after exhale Ask what stands above the ruler, yet knows it from the inside. That question is the surviving blade. It cuts through centuries of rubble. The ritual worlds of Philae and Haran and the late Academy carried more than this. Of course they did. Celestial timing, consecrated materials, trained voice, formal initiation, communal field, a guide who knew the thresholds and the dangers, all of that mattered. Yet the core survived because the human build still includes mask, craving, force, falsehood, and the capacity to rise through them. Bridge this back to your own life. The empire outside banned public ascent. The empire inside keeps banning it every time you choose image over honesty, control over contact, craving over direct feeling, pride over scale, force over clarity, accumulation over enough, and history over living presence. That may sound fierce. It is meant to be plain. The old schools were tracking what blocks direct access and building ways through it. One more practical move, and then the story lands where it belongs. Tonight, before sleep, give yourself 12 minutes. Sit upright. 3 breaths through the nose. Long exhale each time. Let the face inside and the face outside match. Ask which ruler held the throne most of the day. Feel that ruler in the body rather than thinking about it. Exhale and soften the physical grip around it. After one exhale, rest in the pause. In the pause, ask one question. What knows this ruler and stays larger than it? Stay with the felt sense rather than running toward an answer. That is small compared with a temple cycle, a year of purification, or full theurgic training. It is still a true fragment of the old upward art. Repeated over nights, the ruler grows easier to spot. Over months, the throne changes occupants less wildly. Over time, the wider chamber stops feeling like theory. The integration is the whole point. The old practitioners climbed so speech-aligned, conduct-aligned. Death lost some terror, and the divine source moved through a more transparent human instrument. So where does the story close? Back at the doorway. The priest at Philae loses the temple. The philosophers lose the academy. Hypatia loses her body. Books lose the library shelves that held them. A council takes a hammer to the soul's longer arc. A state labels ascent craft as crime. And still the current lives. It lives in the student voice hidden in a jar saying, "I see the eighth." It lives in a desert monk holding the heart in silence until the mind settles below speech. It lives in a Heranian temple room aligned to a planet under a legal disguise clever enough to survive another century. It lives in a Florentine scholar translating Hermes before Plato because he can feel which text carries the older fire. It lives every time a human being stops performing, meets the active ruler honestly, and rises one band higher inside themselves. That last line matters most. Public history is one scale. Living verification is another. A ban can close schools, seize images, wreck libraries, and criminalize rights. A ban cannot change the fact that human awareness still contains layers, still contracts, still opens, still touches a life larger than the role it is playing. Empires work on roads, grain, taxes, bodies, images, doctrines, borders. The interior stair keeps rising through the human frame all the same. That is why this matters 1,431 years later. The old public staircase got broken apart. You carry enough of the architecture inside your own experience to begin climbing again. If this served you, subscribe. We stay with these subjects and we take them all the way into the source material and all the way back into ordinary life. Share this with the one person you know who cares about both history and inner work and has grown tired of shallow talk on either side. And drop the single line from this that stays with you after the screen goes dark, because that line usually marks the live wire for your own next step. One last image. A door of stone closes on an island temple. Somewhere else, a jar goes into the earth. Somewhere else, a philosopher crosses a border with manuscripts wrapped against dust. Somewhere else, a monk in the desert learns to hold the heart steady in silence. Somewhere else, a student writes, "I see myself in the eighth." That is how wisdom survives a crackdown. One body at a time, one hidden text at a time, one accurate practice passed forward at a time. The title says this was banned exactly 1,431 years ago. Institutionally, yes. Legally, yes. Inside the human being, the older art waited. It waited through councils and emperors and soldiers and dust. It waited through the long centuries when the open schools were gone. It waits still for the next person willing to sit down, match inner face with outer face, locate the ruling contraction, and rise above it. Stone doors close. The inward stare stands.